There you go. I got it.
You're there, Shirley.
How you doing?
Well, we're doing okay.
I
Much-
heard you say you're feeling good. That's great.
I'm feeling much, much better, and I see the doctor this afternoon, and hopefully he'll get me and release me from whatever I can not do. We shall see. Pam, can we hear you now?
We see you.
We see you.
Yep.
Welcome back.
Yes,
I don't know what happened.
Well, you're here
Hey,
now.
I think
gotcha.
you're now.
some days I don't think Zoom likes me. I don't know.
Well, you're the blessing, not the curse.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll wait a couple more minutes. We have a couple of new people who might be joining us.
There's Evelyn.
That's Evelyn, yeah.
Yeah. Morning, Evelyn.
Good morning. How are you feeling, Steve?
So
You're-
much better. It's just like
you're-
night and day. Like
You look
night and
better.
day.
Yes.
But thank you everyone for your thoughts and prayers.
Okay, well, I'm ready. I think
Okay.
as you know, there's been unfortunate death in the family. Bonnie Cutler passed away yesterday morning,
Oh,
and Denny is really desolate, and we grieve with him. And so maybe we'll begin this morning. Steve suggested that we begin with a moment of silence in her memory. Bonnie was just a wonderful, wonderful lady, very friendly, and I used to go out with them every once in a while to Chinese restaurants, and we would have a great time. And she was positive, and she's just, I'm gonna miss her. So
Also,
let
too, she was a active member of Torah study until she got sick.
So let us pause now for a moment of silence in memory of Bonnie Cutler.
Okay.
May Bonnie's memory be for a blessing always, and we express our condolences to Danny and to their son Steve, who flew in, and to the entire family. And let us say,
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, let's begin with the blessing together. Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav,
Torah. Blessed are you,
you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the world, who has sanctified us with your commandments.
commanded us to gaze the words of the Lord.
Amen.
Okay, Rabbi, I believe we're on page 161.
Good morning, everyone.
No.
Can you all hear me and see me okay?
yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. And I think there's 9 of us. Bernie is back from his travels, and we've offered him a trade to get him to move back to Phoenix, and he's considering it. I didn't want to tell him how hot it was when I was walking the dogs last night, but just between friends, it was somewhere between 109 and 112 degrees. But what is that to sacrifice to live in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona?
Well, it's 83 degrees.
Just to have 5 or 6 months of temperatures over 110 degrees. So we're hoping that he'll say yes. We're confident. Hi, Donna. You welcome back.
I'm
Um,
glad to be here.
We were supposed to have two guests this morning, but it doesn't look like either one is here. So I was instructed to welcome the guests, but there's no guest to welcome at the moment. So we'll, if they do appear, they may be having issues with the internet or whatever. If you can't hear me or see me, just wave your hands wildly. We are on page 161, and we're dealing with the very famous section in the Torah about blessings and curses. And I guess that is something that is part of life, right? That we have good things happen and bad things happen. And I have a friend who grew up with not too many advantages and not terribly supportive parents and so forth. And they kind of feel that, they didn't have the advantages growing up that some other people did have. But I tried to tell them that, no matter what kind of background you come from, everybody has their challenges, right? So you have very fabulously successful parents who are very supportive, but the expectations are extremely high, and that creates its own problems. So you have problems that are created by other people, and then you have problems that might be created just by a situation. And then, oh, there's Natalie.
Natalie is here.
Okay. So
Well,
Natalie, I was
Couldn't get in.
instructed, I was under strict instructions to welcome you warmly to our Torah study. And so
I
here's
was
the
at your
warm,
interfaith meeting.
I remember you a little bit, yes. And so this is your warm welcome.
Thank you.
And you're only getting this once, so don't expect any more warm welcomes in the future. So, and it let everyone know that I welcomed her warmly. But this is Natalie. She came to a program we had several weeks ago. And Natalie, do you want to briefly, introduce yourself?
I'm not a member of the temple. I appreciate that I'm welcomed here. And I live in Trilogy in the West Valley. I'm a New Yorker. You can tell when I say hello. And my background is special needs. I taught neurologically impaired, emotionally handicapped boys in New York, and I'm retired now. And I'm glad to be welcomed because I think during COVID it happened. I've had more and more of a need to learn more about my background and to connect with other people who are Jewish.
Good.
Welcome.
That wasn't a problem in New York. It's a problem where I'm living now.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Well, you're welcome here and we enjoy having you.
Thank you.
Did you receive the reading for this week, Natalie?
Yes,
Okay, good. So
and
we're
I
on
read
page,
last week's too.
Oh, okay.
so we're on page 161. And this is a commentary from Harvey Fields, who was rabbi at the Wilshire Boulevard Synagogue. And this book was written about 40 years ago. Pam and Minya have promised to write an updated version of it. And excuse me, hello?
Lucky you.
Yes. Hi, Ornan. I'm in Torah study, so I'll have to call you back. Okay. That is the travel agent who's handling what we hope will become our Israel trip. So we were talking about blessings and curses. So I have a friend who grew up without too many advantages, and they felt that they had received more curses than blessings. But no matter what the mix is, and I guess that's what makes life interesting, is that everybody gets a different mix of blessings and curses. But even people who have no external curses, there's things that happen that make you feel like you have, expectations you can't meet, or there's something happens that's not the fault of your parents or your friends, but things happen. And so everybody has their problems, everybody. And so the question is this caused by God? This is a permutation of the same question of why do bad things happen to good people that we ask every week in a different form. And so this is this is from Parshat Ki Tavo, which is toward the end of the book of Deuteronomy. So as we've spoken a little bit about the book of Deuteronomy being in some ways a summary of the first four books of the Torah, but it is also a rewrite, and so it has a different philosophy in certain ways than the other four books of the Torah. The book of Deuteronomy is a little bit more nationalistic. It's a little bit less universalistic than certain parts of the other books. I gave a sermon a few weeks ago where we said that in Exodus, when Moses appoints all the judges, he credits it to his father-in-law Jethro, who was not Jewish, who was a Midianite, and not only that, he was a Midianite priest. And in the book of Deuteronomy, in contrast, Moses, speaking in the first person, giving a speech, doesn't mention Jethro at all. And he says, I just decided to do this. So when we had a little discussion as part of the Friday night, this a couple weeks ago, and my argument was this shows that Deuteronomy is trying to write Yitro out of the story, because you don't want to credit one of the best ideas in the Torah, which is the creation of a system of judges, to a non-Jewish priest. And somebody said no, that they felt that Moses was just giving the short version, that it was not necessarily a deliberate attempt to rewrite history, but rather just to keep it short. The basic point is that there were judges created, doesn't really matter who did it. So, there's different ways to interpret things. But this is toward the end of Deuteronomy. So here too, it's not the first time the Torah has mentions blessings and curses. And we'll have to see whether Deuteronomy is shifting subtly some of the philosophic background of the blessings and curses. But this is a part of one of Moses's final speeches to the Israelites, as we've spoken about. He's approaching 120 years old. And, this is going to be the end. God has already told him he's not going into the land of Israel. His career has to end, and his life has to end. And as a partial compensation, God allows him to go up on Mount Nebo and see the land of Israel, but knowing that he will never enter it. And from my point of view, this is not punishment for hitting the rock instead of talking the rock. Nobody follows instructions 100% of the time, but rather that it's the end of the generation. If you let Moses run the Israelites for another 120 years, nothing ever changes. I'm hoping when I hit retirement age in 30 or 40 years, that I will go gracefully and retire, move to Florida, and not try to hold on and hold on and hold on to my job, even if I can't see and I can't hear and I can't walk and I can't function as a rabbi very well. I'll say another 6 months, another 6 months. Let me just finish out this board's term. And then when that board said, well, the new board is not stable yet, let me do another 6 months. Okay, comments to open us up, and then we'll start reading. Minya.
I realize this was written a long time ago, but the one paragraph that lists the 12 curses, which is right at the beginning on 161. Maybe I'm very naive, but did people really have relations with these strange situations that are mentioned here?
I'm not an expert on these things.
Well, but you're a rabbi, so you're close to an expert. No, but
But-
seriously, is this
That's your
something?
story? You're not an expert?
That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay,
but,
then we'll skip my question then.
But it's a good question. I mean, in general, we don't know whether a lot of the law, this is not laws, this is just a summary from Moses, right? So Moses is speaking in the first person to the Israelites about what has happened or what legislation has been passed. It'd be like a president at the end of his 4-year term saying, well, 2 years ago, we passed a law that prohibited X, Y, and Z. So it's not saying that this is the laws, it's just explaining what Moses said were the laws. But a lot of the laws in the Torah seem to have been written much later than they were intended to be observed in. So people who wrote and edited the Torah were trying to create a certain impression about what existed at a certain time period. Did those laws actually appear in those times? Nobody knows, but it appears in some cases unlikely. So it tells us more about the agenda of the people who are trying to lead the Israelites rather than what actually were laws or not laws. It's more aspirational than historical. So did these things occur? Were there a need for laws? I don't know. But clearly the people running the Israelites or running the texts felt that these were somehow important. Now, if nobody did it, then why would they be important? So it's very possible that they saw these things happening and they figured, we better try to stop it, or at least we better pretend that we tried to stop it. Other than that, if it didn't happen, maybe there's some philosophical reason they want to have such a law to emphasize something. So with the laws about idolatry, it appears that the Israelites may have been doing a lot of idolatry, but let's say they didn't, maybe they wanted a law just to emphasize the importance of monotheism, right? So if everyone's monotheistic, you still might want to have a law to say, don't worship idols, because you want to stress how important it was. So there's two possibilities. Either they were doing it and the people in charge wanted to stop it, or the people weren't doing it, but the people in charge felt, nevertheless, you want to stress how important it is. Are you talking about bestiality or incest?
Well, I'm talking about the 12 curses that were listed. And I guess I just was surprised at sexual relations with some of the things they listed, with fathers and mothers and mother-in-laws, and I don't know. I just, like I said, I must be very naive. I can't imagine those
Right.
things going
Right.
on, but I guess
You
they
don't live in Greenwich Village. But yes. Pam.
What I found interesting about the curses is most of them are very egregious things they shouldn't do, but one of them is about don't move a monument or something.
Right.
A landmark, a landmark.
A landmark.
A
Right.
landmark.
What does
Because-
that have to do with anything?
Yes, it does. Because if there is a landmark that denotes a specific distance, or if someone is blind and relies on a particular landmark to orient where he is and where he may be going, you are deliberately trying to trip that individual up, either physically or psychologically. And it is a no-no as far as I can see, where they phrased it rather peculiarly, and yet I can understand what it was. The
So-
landmarks can be anything, an actual marker, a building, a tree, whatever it is. They're not going to move a tree, but anything else could probably
cut it
be
down.
moved.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was
Doesn't
thinking
seem
of
to be
it
in the
more like a
same scale as
monument.
the other ones, though.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you, Evelyn. That was a good explanation.
And that will be in Evelyn's Torah commentary that's going to be published next year.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Marcia,
I'll help you with it, Evelyn.
Thanks.
All these 12 curses, they just seem to be like people acting mean and nasty. And it's just I know what Minya's saying, just such an odd conglomeration of things, it's like, it's like Mr. Evil walking around, tricking the blind person and rights of strangers and harming a neighbor. It's like, what was that? It was a movie about Despicable Me. It's like that, they find a bad thing and just do it. It's an odd conglomeration of things that you wouldn't think had to be said even,
No.
You think it has to be said?
Yes, I do. But let Bernie go, and then I'll make my comment.
Bernie, and then Evelyn.
What this says to me is something entirely different. What it says to me is that the leaders did not have good control over the people. The people did not have buy-in to all of this. So they had to make it very strict. Like Maud used to say on TV, God will get you for that. And that's the story that I take out of this.
That there's no question that the leaders had very little control over the Israelites. In fact, throughout history, the different leaders, the people, it's not clear that the people wanted these leaders or had these leaders. Certainly later in the Second Temple period, only 1 or 2% maybe were supporting the Pharisees, and then later the sages. So most people just didn't support them. So that if the sages say we're having trouble getting some of the people to conform, they're giving the impression, well, we're the leaders, but the people aren't following us well. But in truth, many of the people didn't recognize these people as leaders, period. And you saw that they rebelled against Moses repeatedly. That wasn't rebelling against their leader. Many of these people didn't want Moses and his group there at all. They didn't feel they were rebelling necessarily. They're feeling, one of the groups said, who made you leader over us? We don't accept your leadership. We never wanted your leadership. We have a completely different conception of what should go on. And you're trying to boss us around, and who elected you? We didn't vote. There was no democracy. Evelyn, and then Steve.
I look at it as
Natalie.
Yeah, I look at it as a social behavior. When you read literature, the ancient Greeks, the Romans, medieval literature, these types of incestuous human behavior has always existed. And it is part of human behavior. And it is only by laying down certain rules that you can control this behavior. And it is naive to think that this didn't exist then. incestuous relations, parents with children or cousins or in-laws or whatever it was, if the husband takes a second wife and the second wife is younger than the oldest son, what was the Greek story, Phaedra? As I recall, you had the same, or Orestes with his mother. You have this type of human behavior that has always existed. And unless you specify that this is against the laws of God, and it is not to be, people will continue to do this. And so my feelings are that these were legitimate no-nos, as it were, and that you were wrong to participate in something like that, aside from the fact that the leaders of the Israeli tribes could not control the Israelites as such. It is, people will behave badly unless you tell them, no, you may not do it. And so my feelings are these were sensible rules, because otherwise you would have anarchy.
Very true. Steve.
Okay, it's like going, beginning of school, and the teacher has to reiterate the rules of the classroom. But then again, kids or even adults have short memories. Therefore, it has to be repeated and repeated and repeated in order to keep order and abide by the rules. That's the way I acknowledge it.
What,
What does that mean, Steve, to keep order?
Keep order, absolutely.
What does that mean? I mean, what
Order
is,
is just some sense of a definitive set of rules and regulations that people will abide by, and if you don't, then you suffer the consequences.
What did they do? What was the punishment?
Well, I
Well,
mean, obviously, some of these curses occurred. Otherwise, they wouldn't have mentioned it.
But so
right, but what are the
When-
consequences?
yeah, exactly. And so you get something bad happens. Does somebody now think, what did they do wrong to make this happen? You know,
right.
so it's like a backward thing. And then you start thinking, people start thinking about what bad thing did that person do for these horrible things to have happened to them?
Right. And then if you reject that and say, no, that person didn't do anything, then it undermines the deterrent value of this whole system, where you're trying to say, don't, worship idols, because otherwise you could catch this very horrible disease.
And you see so many times people who behave so badly in so many ways in society, and nothing happens to them, and you worry about the person who's been going along doing it right all along the way, and all the trials of Job are upon them or something, and you
Right.
say, how can this be right?
Right. All right, Natalie, and then Cy.
No, I was going to ask the same question about the consequences. I mean, you see commercials on television all the time, horrible things about stopping smoking. You wonder what's really a deterrent. These curses, it's not like you do something and automatically there's cause and effect and something happens that moment later. So it's like, well, is this connected to that? And maybe it won't really happen. And if we have those laws, then if there aren't any consequences, yes, they're reminders and they help at times, but how effective are they?
That's the question, is how effective, and I guess if they're 30 or 40% effective, at least that does something. Okay, Cy, and then Evelyn, and then Minya.
I think that they basically had a problem to convince the people regarding God. This was not a given. This was a big job on the part of a number of people. And otherwise, why would the punishment come from God rather than from the society? They had a society going. They had a social society. Why couldn't the society punish those people who were doing the wrong thing? Why was it God? And that to me is a very important question.
So in your view, there should have been more civil penalties and less divine penalties.
Right.
So just make a normal society where if you're caught sleeping with your mother-in-law, you get put in prison. Now, part of the problem with that is they were in the desert, so that it was hard. They just set up a judicial system. They didn't have a prison system. And as you see, once you start putting people in prison, you have more people in prison. And before you know it, it's a whole industry. And, you know, just the people in the desert were schlepping around a tabernacle, you know, a little chapel. You know, now they're going to be schlepping around on big wheels, these prisons. I mean, so, you know, it's easier to say, let God strike them down dead, you know, or let God have the ground swallow them up. It's cheaper, and it's you don't have as much administrative responsibility. You have, yeah, otherwise you're going to have a big civil service, and there was really no budget for that. Okay, Evelyn and then Minya.
One of the ways that society has coped with that, and you can do it in a smaller group, you can't do it the size of the Israelites, was to shun them. And think of the Amish, the Mennonites, where if someone or the members of the Latter-day Saints, you conform or you are out of the group. And in those cases, if they did toss them out, let's say in the desert, they would die without the support of everybody. However, if so many people disobeyed, you can't very well do that. So it depends upon the circumstances. Ideally, yes, a civil resolution would be ideal, but in this case, putting the fear of God into people seemed to be the most expedient way of handling that situation.
Spinoza, the famous Jewish philosopher, we have a kid coming now to services who is Nathan Espinoza with the same name. And I think that Baruch Spinoza was originally Espinoza as well. The E kind of dropped off. But Spinoza was excommunicated by the synagogue in Amsterdam, as you know. We don't have the minutes, unfortunately, of the synagogue board meeting where they decided to excommunicate him. So we don't know what. Hi, Lane, can I call you back? I'm in Torah study.
Certainly.
So he got excommunicated, and he didn't care. You know, it was in Holland, which was a very liberal place, and you did not have to be of a religion in order to have a social group or an economic base. So he moved out of Amsterdam. I think he moved to The Hague, and he had his philosophical friends of different religions, and he didn't go to any religion. He didn't convert to Christianity, but he dropped his membership. Basically, he said, if you're going to excommunicate me and not let me be a member, I'll save money on dues. That's all. You know, it's a very modern attitude. So, but certainly in the biblical period, that might have been harder to do. You know, if you're wandering around in the desert with a group and the group says you can't wander with us anymore, unless you find another group to wander with, you're in big trouble, you know, right? Okay, who is next? Evelyn and Minya and then Donna.
I said my piece.
Okay, Minya? No.
I didn't have a question.
Okay,
Or-
Donna.
just just thinking here about all this, there are man's laws and there are God's laws, and they don't always coincide. Sometimes they do, but they don't always.
And therefore,
Therefore, we have to make a decision, and I think each person does. Is this really what God is saying, or is this what man is saying? And as I say, sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not. And where does the wise person go? Hopefully with God, but they may get some retribution from man.
okay, so you know, in like the former Soviet Union, it was prohibited, it was semi-prohibited to practice any religion.
Right.
So, you could kind of, if you were discreet, they wouldn't necessarily bother you. But if you made a big deal about it, they could put you in prison. Natan Sharansky was put in prison, I think, for 8 years for teaching Hebrew and promoting religion. And at the time, as a child, I understood that to be an anti-Jewish measure, but they were doing that to other religions as well, and that for some reason that wasn't clearly explained. So, not that it made it better or worse. In Iran, in contrast, they conflate their interpretation of Islam with civil law. And so they say women need to cover their heads. You don't cover your head, you're violating our civil law and you can go to prison. So different societies handle the difference between civil law and religious law in very different ways. Steve, Marcia, Cy. Okay, then let's start. Page 161, right column, Perek Bet, blessings and curses. Who is responsible for them? And question 2 is, are they just? Pam, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
Pam has her reading glasses on.
That's how you know I'm ready. In these speeches by Moses to Israelites, we find a powerful idea, an idea that has occurred earlier in the Torah. Some would argue that it is the greatest challenge put before the Israelites. They are told if they faithfully observe the mitzvot or the commandments, they will be blessed. If they do not practice the mitzvot, they will be cursed. The choice is theirs. This proposition of blessings and curses is also presented in Leviticus, Parsha Bahar. Now the Torah returns to it. This time, however, it is presently partially in the form of a ritual formula to be pronounced by tribal leaders and then proclaimed by the Levites to the people.
So just to stop, this is what I was saying, is that Moses is summarizing what's in the first 4 parts of the Torah, but because this was written later, this was written presumably in the 660 BCE, roughly, at the time of King Josiah. They're making certain subtle changes to it, and not only form, but in terms of content as well.
Okay, keep going.
Yep.
The ritual contains 12 curses, each beginning with the words, "Cursed be the one who." The curses condemn 1, creating images, 2, insulting parents, 3, moving a landmark, 4, misleading a blind person, 5, subverting the rights of the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, 6, having sexual relations with one's father's wife, 7, having sexual relations with animals, 8, having incestuous relations, 9, having sexual relations with one's mother-in-law, 10, secretly harming a neighbor, 11, accepting a bribe, and 12, failing to uphold the laws of Torah.
Okay, so this is in some ways a summary of what's in Leviticus. If we had more time and the inclination, we could read the section in Leviticus and the section in Deuteronomy and look for subtle differences, but we're not going to do that now. But you can see a lot of them deal with sex, but not all of them. And it seems like a very, as Minya and Evelyn and Steve and Marcia and others pointed out earlier, it seems like a pretty odd mix. So to put number 9, having sex with one's mother-in-law, in with number 12, failing to uphold the laws of the Torah, or even number 11, accepting a bribe, it doesn't seem to go in the same list. You're mixing what is considered in modern society, personal private matters with things that, are religious matters, and with other things which are civil crimes. So if you try to bribe a policeman who stops you for just driving at what you consider to be a very reasonable speed, and you offer him $100, Shirley's saying, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Then you can get, what?
We're just hoping you're not speaking from actual.
No.
No, I only offered $20.
I think 100 is too little and society wouldn't accept it.
Yes, it's the problem was that I was a cheap tipper. That's that was my downfall. But the 45 days in the county jail were a good experience,
Yeah. And saying, but I'm a rabbi, just doesn't work with the police.
I was sure it would. But mixing up bribes with religious limits that you don't uphold all the laws of the Torah, and with sexual morality, having sex with your mother-in-law, it seems like 3 completely different lists. And so it's interesting that they don't make that differentiation. Comments, Evelyn?
Yes, why did they put failing to uphold the laws of Torah last rather than first? It would seem to me that should have gone before anything else.
Yes, I agree. If this was a rational list in the way we see it, but the whole list seems very bizarre. Marcia?
It's like they threw in the Torah thing at the end, like, and don't do all the other stuff either.
Right.
And they should have led with it possibly.
Right.
But the whole thing is like, behave yourself. What's the matter with you people? You're not acting properly. You shouldn't do all this stuff, and and make sure you don't murder anybody either. It's kind of nuts, so yeah.
Minya was questioning number 3, moving a landmark, correct?
No, it was someone else, but I had the same.
Who was complaining about number 3? Pam. So that one to me seems one of the few that belongs in this list, right? So when I bought my house in Jamaica, I had to have a surveyor do a survey of the boundaries of the property, because the neighbor to my left was very agitated from his relations with the previous owner. And so I knew that he might claim part of my property as his property. So I had to have it surveyed officially, so that if that were to happen, I would know exactly where. So moving a boundary would be, if there is on the survey, there's a certain way they tell, there's a certain marker in the ground. If you move that marker, then you're, trying to create fraudulent evidence that your property extends further than it could extend. So that to me makes perfect sense.
Yeah, man.
But to have sexual relations with your mother-in-law, that seems to be, more, it's nobody's business. I mean, I've never heard, in all my years being a rabbi, I've heard some pretty strange things, but nobody's ever said that they were having sex with their mother-in-law. They said they hate their mother-in-law, they want to murder their mother-in-law, they want to throw their mother-in-law out of the house, but having sex with their mother-in-law is very rare.
What about stepmother-in-law?
Oh, well, who knows? Who knows? I'm sure if I, work another few years that it'll come up, I'm sure. If anyone here has, issues of that sort, make an appointment and we'll talk about it. Who's next? Any comments? Yes, Minya.
Number 10 was just on the news this past week. There was a man in Phoenix
Oh,
who was shooting some kind of a spray underneath his neighbor's door and was caught
Oh,
on the bell thing.
I saw that.
And when I first saw it, I was like shocked that anyone would even do such a thing. And then seeing it here, I guess it's not that unusual for people to harm their neighbors.
Wow.
But this
Right.
is terrible.
But in
Watching
this day and
somebody-
age that he didn't, the Ring doorbells are clearly marked, that he was so stupid that he would go and try to poison them when he should have known he was on camera.
Well, he was on all fours. He was doing it from underneath the door. He must have thought that he wasn't going to be caught with the bell, but it did just happen. So times don't change that much.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of that. And where they try they try, where the guy who started the antiviral program, McAfee, he was accused, he had a house in the Cayman Islands and he had these vicious dogs, and his neighbor is accused of having poisoned his dogs. And then the neighbor turns up shot and dead. McAfee was accused of that, but never was prosecuted for that.
I think that was on
So-
Dateline.
Yeah, so neighbors can turn vicious, No question that you can harm your neighbor or try to harm your neighbor. So be careful of your neighbors. Okay, other comments? Steve, Marcia, Cy, Donna, Natalie. Okay, let's read on. Pam.
Okay. Conversely, Moses assures the people that if they observe faithfully all the commandments of the Torah, they will enjoy 4 special blessings, each beginning with the words, "Blessed shall you be." The blessing shall come upon the people, 1, in their cities and in the country, 2, in the numbers of their children, herds, and produce, 3, in their basket and kneading bowl, and 4, in their comings and goings. After articulating these curses and blessings, Moses adds a list of additional rewards if the Israelites observe all the commandments God has given them. This includes victory over enemies, productivity of their herds and crops, abundant prosperity, and leadership among all the nations. Moses adds, if the people fail to practice the mitzvot, they will be punished with such catastrophes as calamity, frustration in all that they undertake, sickness, blight, skies that turn to copper, and earth that turns to iron, destruction by their enemies, madness, blindness, dissolving of family ties, exile, ruthless rule by strangers, terrible famine, and return to Egyptian slavery and oppression. The Torah concludes that these curses and blessings, these rewards and punishments, with the statement, "These are the terms of the covenant that Adonai commanded Moses to conclude with the Israelites." Keep going. One ponders these blessings and curses and asks, what did Moses think? Did he really believe that refusal to follow the commandments would bring about such frightful punishments? Or did he make the result of following the commandments so pleasant and the consequence so deliberate or careless rejection so calamitous because he believed that only fear of God would bring compliance? In our modern society, is there anything that can be learned from this list of curses and blessings?
Yes, and that's it. If I can get fear of God into my congregation, they'll come more on Friday nights. And I'm starting this week to tell people the truth, that if they don't come every Friday night, that the devil is going to bug them and maybe cut off their internet to their houses and do all sorts of terrible things. And the only way to avoid that is to come to services every week. So, but the problem is that it's hard to, that people won't believe that there's, consequences for this sort of bad ritual behavior. And even for things like poisoning your neighbor, the only reason this guy who did this may be sad is because he got caught. He may go to prison for a couple years, right? But is he sad because he did something that was wrong? I mean, to poison your neighbor is not a nice, I mean, let's assume the neighbor was not a nice person and yelled at him for parking on the street or whatever. Does that justify you trying to poison them?
Yeah.
I mean, so, it's hard to get people to do what you want. As a rabbi, I almost never succeed. But I think this new idea of threatening that the devil's going to cut off their internet, this may finally be the gimmick that I can get them to do what I think they should do.
But God
Marsha.
gives you a test making you a rabbi.
I thought I'd have a lot more power than I do. Marsha.
You
Marcia,
should go into policing.
Marcia.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm thinking,
When I get reincarnated, I'm gonna be a police officer in my next life.
are you gonna be a Jewish police officer?
I'm gonna be a Jewish police officer, a traffic police officer. I'm gonna put my car on 103rd Avenue in Sun City and stop
fast
all
do you think
these
you're
older
going?
people who are racing up and down in their golf carts. I'm gonna give them all traffic tickets. Nobody gets out of it.
this is material for his next book.
Yeah.
Marsha.
I read this thing and I think about anti-Semitism, and I'm thinking, what do people think the Jewish people did so bad that they have to be punished, by the behavior that people have against Jewish people? It's sort of like, do they think that that Jewish people do all these horrible things that they should be exiled, but sort of shunned? It's a shunning of sorts in society, and you worry about that.
Yes, I mean, it's very easy to stigmatize a group. Very easy.
I think they feel threatened. I think of the way the Orientals are discriminated in terms of admission to our universities, where they excel in mathematics and other technical aspects of learning. And I think it is resentment and concern. I think it is a feeling of being threatened, and because of that, they stigmatize them. And I think this was true of the Jews in the 30s and 40s and even 50s, who were discriminated against and could not get into any of the better universities. Those living in New York City were forced to go to City College because they couldn't get into Harvard or Yale, while their grade point average or their grades were far superior. And I remember someone telling my husband, who was an orthodontist, that they wanted to come to Jewish doctors because they knew that Jewish doctors had to have a much higher standard of and quality of intellect in order to be accepted by these universities. And therefore, if they went to a Jewish doctor, they were going to someone who was better qualified. The publicity of it, it's crazy, but
they still think it's the same thing.
Yes, I've run into non-Jews who say, I've got a Jewish doctor, I'm in good hands, or I've got a Jewish lawyer, I'm for sure going to win the case. And my father and Evelyn's husband were both dentists, and my father went to City College because that was the only place.
That was the only avenue available. Yeah.
A Jewish boy from his social background could go. And then he went to dental school because in all of City College, which was filled with ambitious Jewish boys, they only took one. The number one student was accepted to medical school, maybe the one or two. And after that, nobody could get into medical school. So, but dental school was open. So anyone who was a good student could go. So that's how he became a dentist instead of a doctor.
And
Yeah.
so City College wound up with a good reputation because it had all these smart Jewish kids in there. And so even though they were, I mean, I went to City College, the tuition was $13 a year and a semester, and I was kind of upset about that, I remember. And, but the school had a really good academic reputation because of its student body.
So here we're talking about how there were certain barriers, but if the barriers are not so severe and there's ways around those barriers, then you can still get what you want more or less, and therefore you don't feel punished. Here, we're talking about curses that presumably don't let you become a dentist instead of a doctor, but rather, kill you or make you spend all of eternity in hell or something very, very bad. Sai.
Would you say that a good part of our religion is based on the carrot and the stick?
Certainly this week's Parsha is totally carrot and stick, right? If you do what, and what are these lists of these things you have to do? There are, I mean, how many of them are, accepted in every society? Maybe of the 12, maybe 3 or 4 are just everybody would agree are bad. If we leave the sexual things out and we leave the religious things out and only the general ethics like don't steal or don't accept a bribe, of the 12, there's like 3 or 4 like that. So it's pretty arbitrary, it would seem, at least some of them. And so yes. Evelyn.
We look at what happened 6,000 years ago, or even 4,000 years ago, with our current minds, with our current education, and what we have learned in our growing years and what our society has provided for us. And to go back to that time, you have to realize they didn't have this information, and they were ignorant, superstitious. And the upshot is that if you laid down the law, some would obey, but basically they lived by intuition and what they wanted. And it was, I won't say it was, they were selfish, but you really had to force the people to think in terms of religion and what thou mayest do and what thou mayest not do. And it was difficult to give these people that sense of personal responsibility towards themselves and towards the greater society, as it were, the greater group, whether it was the tribe or larger groups than that. And we always have to think that we're thinking of these things in our terms, not in how they thought then. And it's very difficult to reconcile what they thought and said because we're thinking of it as of today rather than what they thought years ago.
Just to be precise here, if we accept the theory that the book of Deuteronomy was written during the time of King Josiah, when he did a reform program in around 660 BCE, if you take 660 to 0 and then 2023, this would put us at about 2,680 years ago. So just a little bit less than 3,000 years. And this would put us maybe 600 years after Moses presumably lived. So it wasn't written actually by Moses. It was speeches written in Moses's name 600 years after he died, and 600 years ago.
Yeah.
So whatever that's worth, just to understand when these things happen. Okay, Pam, back to you.
I'll pass the baton.
Okay, Minya, would you take over?
Yes, do you want me to read the box or skip it?
Sure, let's read the box. This is from Deuteronomy Rabbah. When you see Rabbah after something, it means it's a midrash. This is a book of midrashim, rabbinic stories that are written specifically as commentary on the book of Deuteronomy.
Knowledge brings responsibility. Rabbi Simeon ben Halafta taught that if one becomes knowledgeable of Torah and its commandments, but then does not fulfill them, the punishment will be more severe. Other rabbis teach that benefits, even peace, come into the world on account of the merits of those who live according to the commandments.
All right, comments on this? Bernie or Natalie?
Is it better to be ignorant and not have the knowledge? So it seems like we're punishing you depending on what you do with that knowledge or don't do.
So it's the defense of, I didn't know it was illegal to sleep with my mother-in-law would, according to this thinking, be partly a defense. If the judge views you as sincere and that you really didn't know, even though it's still technically a crime, you would be punished less than somebody who had studied this in Torah study today and then went and did something like that. So that ignorance is partly a defense. Does that strike you as good or bad, Natalie?
It strikes me as bad, but it's used.
But
All
here
the
it's
time.
justified. Here, Rabbi
If
Shimon
you can
ben
get away with it, it's
Halafta.
definitely a defense.
Sai, you agree that this is something that you should that you agree with Shimon ben Halafta that people who are ignorant should get off lighter than people who definitely know these things?
Have to study it.
What?
A little study.
There's technicalities, but if you have the knowledge, then you're culpable. What are you going to do with that knowledge? You can't deny it once you have it.
Mhm.
So we hope it's used for good purpose.
Steve?
Yep.
Anyone? Okay, back to you, Minya.
Several-
I do have a question.
Okay, Sai.
There were civilizations coming before this particular one, in which things occurred that were entirely different from my point of view, from my own reading, as compared to what the Israelis lived through. I'm talking about the Romans and the Greeks who lived before them and passed on a lot of good things. So it bothers me that in reading the Torah, particularly this section, where did they get these bad things, if you want to call them bad, these odd things, if you will, when there were societies around them who had advanced so much more than they had? And some of that had to be filtered down to them.
That's a good, but you're making the assumption that some of these groups around them, you're thinking of the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Canaanites and the Phoenicians and the Philistines and groups like that were more advanced than the Israelites.
That's right. And all the Greeks, certainly.
Well, the Greeks certainly were more advanced in certain ways, but they weren't neighbors. They were across the ocean. So, and that was later, so I'm not sure I agree that these other tribes were necessarily more advanced, but perhaps they were.
So what I'm asking is, why didn't the Israelis learn some things from them? Why is
They
that whole
did, they
society
did.
We are
whole society
forgetting,
was a priestly society?
They
You
did.
think-
All right, Evelyn and then Marcia.
you forgot that these Israelites were slaves in Egypt and did not have the benefit of law per se, except as they lived under the Egyptians. And then they wandered into the desert. There were no universities there. They were not going to be able to advance their culture per se. So it was simply God's word and God's instructions given to them on how they should behave. So it isn't really fair to compare the Israelites with any other culture at that time. They weren't exposed to it, and so they wouldn't have known.
Mhm.
Uh,
Marcia.
I think also they were. We keep hearing about the various laws that the Jews had instituted within their tribe that reflected from Babylonian law and from other cultures around them. They were not living in a vacuum. I think they were seeing other things happen and they were adapting a lot of their stuff, because so many times I have and other people ask the question, wasn't this like Babylonia? You know, because we've heard, you know, the Hammurabi's Code and this and that. There's so many things that reflect on into Jewish Torah law that come from other cultures in the area. They were reflecting and learning from other places. And to say that they weren't, I think isn't right. They were living in this vacuum of a bubble of that they were moving across the desert, but they still were bringing with them what they had learned before from other cultures they lived with. Even if they were enslaved, they weren't stupid. They could see what was going on around them. They probably were helping the scribes, etc., in the various villages that they lived in. I mean, they knew what was happening. So I don't think they were ignorant.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Minya, back to you.
Several early rabbinic interpreters suggest that God actually rewards those who obey the mitzvah of the Torah. Rabbi Joshua of Siknin, in the name of Rabbi Levi, teaches that as a reward, God hears the prayer of those who carry out the commandments. Others suggest that the reward is success in business. Rabbi Jonathan holds that performing the mitzvah leads to the blessing of having children, the guarantee of rain in its season, and life after death, resurrection. Rabbi Abba ben Kahana speaks for many of the early rabbinic commentators when he declares, if the people of Israel live by the laws of Torah, God will reward them in the world to come and life after death. The idea of being rewarded in the world to come is a recognition of the harsh realities of human existence. The world we inhabit is imperfect. As biblical authors Job and Koheleth note, good people suffer as well as evil ones. Those who live piously and generously offer and often endure pain with no clear benefits or protection for their loyalty to God. In response to the difficult question of why some good people suffer and some evildoers seem to escape suffering, many rabbinic commentators suggest that God's blessings and curses await us in the world to come, in heaven. It is there that we will know the true justice of God. From the rabbinic interpreter's point of view, that does not mean that human beings have no role in determining their fate in the world to come. On the contrary, choices we make in life influence God's final decree. The intention of the Torah's list of blessings and curses is to urge us to choose lives filled with mitzvah deeds, so we will be assured of an eternity of blessing.
Okay, stop there. So comments, Pam, Evelyn,
Does Judaism have life
Minya.
after death?
It's my
yeah,
question.
it was just,
Does Judaism believe in life after death?
Yes.
Is that another class?
You want a yes or no answer?
I want your best answer.
Oh my God, I'm under such pressure here. Well, does Judaism believe in life after death? That's, what do you mean by that? And according to which
You're just
group?
evading it.
Yeah,
Natalie, I'm doing my best here
The
to
world,
evade that.
the world to
Remember, you're
come.
being
Which
recorded.
group in Judaism are we referring to? The mystics, the Talmudists, the Pharisees, the
Okay,
Essenes?
how about the present day?
Present day reform.
Present day reform. I think we should write to Rabbi Rick Jacobs and ask him.
Who is he?
He's the head of the Reform movement, the
Okay.
head president of the Union for Reform Judaism, and ask him directly what we believe about that and see what he says. But it really depends on which group you're thinking of and what you mean also by life after death. Like
We
you
read,
mean,
we read a book called The World to Come in our book club,
and
and
what,
it talked about basically angels in heaven and the souls of people going to the world to come and living in that world, and then being basically reincarnated into another soul.
I mean, I was surprised to learn that certain branches of mysticism in Judaism believe in reincarnation. So that's when I started lobbying God to be reincarnated as a police officer.
Yeah.
But Maimonides, a philosopher, believes that what is eternal in us is our soul, and that this soul is is something very substantive, but is different from our personality. So when we die, our soul returns to God and is eternal, but it's not our personality. I like blueberries. My soul, when it goes up to heaven, is not going to like blueberries necessarily. It's not even going to have any recognition that when I was alive, I liked blueberries. So, but what's important is that the soul will be purified and will return to God. But it doesn't carry my personality with me. Others say yes, that you go up to heaven and your soul lives eternity up there, and it does carry your soul. So if Marcia likes chocolate ice cream, Marcia's still gonna like. Well, she may not eat up there, and souls don't eat. So that may be a bad example. But if she recognizes her parents, she'll recognize her parents and she'll be reunited with her parents, hopefully in a loving reunion.
I'm gonna ask that, is there reuniting with people that you knew?
In that view, but not Maimonides. So it depends. So there's no one view on this,
So Maimonides says dead is dead, right?
No, Maimonides says your soul is eternal, but your soul does not carry your personality. So when your soul goes back to heaven, what is important is the philosophic refinement to your soul, but it doesn't carry the name Marcia in your soul, and it will not identify your relatives. None of these things are important in the scheme of eternity from Maimonides' point of view. So yes, there's life after death, but it's not our life, if that makes sense. We're carrying a soul, we're the repositories of the soul. This soul is very important, but the soul is not our personality. But when I told people this in Georgia, they didn't like it. So I had to do research and find this other view, which exists, where we are reunited with our relatives, because most people want to live, want a life after death so that they can be reunited with some of their relatives, the ones they loved. They want to avoid some other relatives, the ones that they didn't like. So it's a double-edged sword in that way as well. Evelyn.
How did Jamaica handle this?
yeah. Is resurrection, the concept of heaven, actually mentioned in the Torah? Or is this from the commentators who made these remarks many, many years later?
Hundreds and hundreds of years later. In the Torah, there's comments about this stuff, but they're very difficult to interpret. And both the Torah and the Talmud do not deal with any of these themes in a methodological manner. So what you would think would make sense, and especially in Deuteronomy, they'd say, okay, we're at chapter 34 in our book of Deuteronomy. We're going to talk about life after death. Okay, and then chapter 35 will be about whatever. But they don't do that. They throw out these random comments in the Torah that don't, it's not clear what they mean. And then the rabbis as well in the Talmud, it's very random. Natalie.
Yeah, so if this whole concept of an afterlife, some kind of afterlife that was mentioned in Deuteronomy, helps to make people's fears lessen on earth, helps to make them a better person because their choices are going to affect what happens later on. So it seems like almost like a political kind of control to me.
Right.
But if that's not really the case, like my Christian friends, I am very fearful of death, and I envy them because they all have the same story. I'm going to see my relatives there. I'm going to see my friends there. You're going to a better place. I mean, that's
right. I've heard Christians.
We hear that all the time.
Some young person gets hit by a car and killed, and all these Christians will say, "Oh, he's in a better place."
A better place. Well, the people mourning, if that helps them, that's terrific. It wouldn't help me to feel that way. So I've asked a zillion rabbis, I've done some readings to assuage my fear of death. And they all throw their hands up and can't say anything definitive like the Christians. So
oh, well, I can say something
why,
definitive.
with all this literature and all of these years and all of these rabbis, don't
well, because
Judaism's
not designed to give simple answers to complex questions, where it's designed to help us debate different issues from different vantage points. That's why.
But isn't it also there to help you, your emotional life? And maybe I would believe more if I felt believing would bring me peace later on.
All right. Well, according
maybe
to
I'd come to services.
Wow, now she's motivated me to come up with a good answer. Well, I'll do my best. According to the certain type of mystic, in certain parts of the Kabbalah, there's the belief that our souls retain our personalities, and when we die, we go up to heaven, and we're still identify as George or Susie or whoever, just like we did here, but we're incorporeal, so we no longer have bodies, we no longer eat, but we still know who we are, and we can seek out our relatives up there who have died
by
before.
Computer. How do they figure out how you come together again?
Well, that's the question.
Or will my soul go into a tree? I don't want to be a tree.
No, your soul would go up to heaven to rejoin God, or would not.
It's very busy up there.
Well, there's plenty of room for all the souls, especially because they're incorporeal. Souls don't have bodies, so that doesn't take up much room. So,
okay.
So you can go out, and it's not necessarily up in heaven, but it's with God, wherever God is, and you will be able to find your relatives, even though they don't have bodies and they won't look like your relatives, they will act like your relatives. They will know that they are your father and your mother and whoever else, and you will be able to find them and reunite with them in eternal.
So we don't have the concept of heaven Because if I'm going to be with God, I can be with God on earth because God
Well,
is here helping us and doing things. And
well, I think as with everything, it depends which thinker, what source. There's no one authoritative belief system. I mean, Saadia Gaon from Babylon wrote a book, Sefer Emunot Videot, the book of beliefs and opinions. But even he couldn't come up with, what everybody believes, because there were all sorts of beliefs. What unites Judaism is the practical, that we're all supposed to observe mitzvot. And in modern times, of course, what that means is different between the Reform and the Orthodox, but that pretty much all Jewish thinkers would agree that if you're a good person, God will at least attempt to reward you. But as we see, not all the time does that work out, because there's other factors that are involved, and people have free will, and so God can want for good people to be rewarded in this life, but it's dependent upon how other people behave. And people have free will, so God can't say, I'm going to make sure that this happens, because God doesn't control those things, because people have free will. So it's very complicated, and Judaism's goal is to get us thinking and debating, not to come up with any single answer. And,
Well, you got out of
that's,
that one.
well, I don't think so. Natalie's asked, what did you say? A zillion other rabbis. And she's saying he's just like all the others, and
but you tried.
right, but I failed. I'm going to keep working at it. If you're a good person in your heart, you're going to go to heaven, reunite with your family. You're going to live a long and happy post-life life. The food in heaven is excellent. It's like being on a fancy cruise ship. And it'll just be wonderful. It'll be a better place. But can I guarantee what I just said is right? No. Is that a perfectly viable Jewish option? Maybe, except for the food part. Donna and then Marcia.
Shirley's got her hand up.
Shirley, Donna, and then Marcia. Shirley first.
I think I've got the answer to this. I was listening to an American Army veteran general talking the other. He was just celebrating his 100th birthday, and somebody told him, could he tell people how to survive so that they could live to be a good old age like he was? And he said, sure, avoid death.
That's good.
I like it.
I thought it was a good answer.
Excellent.
Good answer.
Okay, who is next? Donna and then Marcia.
I was a nurse, and I was a coronary care nurse. I worked in the coronary care ICU of hospitals, and we had a patient one time who came in. It's been a long time, so I'm not sure of her age, but probably somewhere in her 40s or 50s, and her heart was stopping. And so we were zapping her to keep, when it stopped, we zapped her to get her going again. We were waiting for the doctor to come in and put in a pacemaker. And every time we did that, zapped her, and she came back, she would say, why are you bringing me back? It is so beautiful there. And which amazed all of us. There was about 10 of us around her bed. But anyway, whether she was seeing heaven or what she was seeing, no one could prove. But she just kept saying, it is so beautiful. Why are you bringing me back?
I've heard that.
Food for thought.
Interesting.
Food for thought.
Marcia?
I didn't have anything to say at that point. Sorry.
Okay. So final comments, blessings and curses. Do you think we need to emphasize that more in our temple, or that I should be sending little notes around saying, do you want a blessing this week or a curse? I better see you Friday night or else. I'll
Don't
get
go
all
there.
these panicking emails of saying, Rabbi, I won't be there, but I have a good excuse. Don't curse me. I can't drive at night. You can't put me in hell forever because I can't drive. That wouldn't be just.
That's it.
Well, but we do we do bless people constantly, and that's so much part of our service. Blessings on their head, Mazel tov, says in Fiddler. I mean, and we're always putting blessings on people, and we hope for the best, I guess, for them, you know?
Rabbi,
Yes, Steve.
since we're coming up close to the high holidays, wouldn't it also be appropriate to say that, we want to be inscribed in the book of life?
Okay, yeah, and there were those who wanted to take that whole thing out of the liturgy for that very reason, because, it sounds nice, you can send a New Year's card saying, may you be inscribed in the book of life this year. But if you think about it, basically it's a threat not to write you into the book of life. So, but do people need to be, do you need to light a fire under them? Or are we in an age where these threats are idle threats?
I think a fire would be appropriate.
Okay, well, I thank you today, and we're going to turn to the final blessing now. So back over to Steve as we recite it.
All right, together. Baruch atah
Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam
asher
asher
natan
natan
lanu
lanu Torah emet
Torah
v'chayei olam letah b'tochenu.
Baruch
Baruch atah Adonai
Notain
Torah.
Blessed is Adonai,
Blessed Adonai our God,
ruler of the universe, who has given us a teaching
given
of
us
truth.
teaching of truth,
Planting.
implanted within us eternal life.
Blessed is Adonai.
Adonai, giver of the Torah.
Amen.
All right, everyone, have a good rest of the week.
What is our,
Thank you.
what is next week's pages?
It is page 168 to 172.
Thank you.
Rabbi, before you go, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
With what's
And
going,
welcome to Natalie to today. So, and thank you for your
Participation.
participation, which put me on the hot seat, but I think I survived.
You did good, Rabbi. You did good. You've been blessed.
Yes, Minya.
my question is, with what's going on in Israel, are you planning the trip because you feel it's safe?
Well, it's reasonably safe.
Well, what is reasonably?
Right.
I mean, if it's reasonably, does it mean that you're taking a chance, you're risking a
You're
trip?
always taking a chance when you go anywhere. I mean, if we were to have a catastrophe occur there, it would be by far more likely to be a traffic accident than anything else. No question. I mean, you're more likely to get hit by a car like 50 times more than, or 500 times more than to get killed by a terrorist. And the current, political fights are very unlikely to lead to any serious problems for the group. But nobody can guarantee, the plane could have a problem with the electrical system and crash. I mean, things could, I can't
No, I
guarantee
understand that part.
but no, I don't think that it's a major fear of terrorism. Or any violence resulting from political problems there, no.
Okay, when is the trip right now?
Right now, but the tentative trip is in the first couple weeks of May.
Your
Oh.
tour guide is not going to take any place that is not safe, so to speak. And I found that a difference in Israel and the United States. that in Israel, I knew where it wasn't safe for me to go. In the United States, no. These things
Right.
of violence occurs in McDonald's and at the University of North Carolina and other
Exactly.
places. We don't know here.
Right.
They know.
Good point.
Good point. Thank you. Okay.
But yeah, I think most of the dangers that our group would encounter there are from cars.
Okay. Thank you very much.
But when our group went to Israel, we were in a 15-person group. A couple of times, some sirens went off, and our leader said, "Get back in the van," and we moved to another spot. So,
And this was like in the on the northern border.
yeah, this was this one was the northern border was the issue where we had to be specifically careful.
Now there is the optional day tour when we're sneaking into Lebanon and going to a Lebanese restaurant there, just to try it out. And that, you could get shot by the border guards.
You know, you were talking about most of the problems being accidents. When I moved back to the States, my children told me I had to go to driver's school again.
Well, that's I can't tell you how fearful I was driving around Tel Aviv last year. I mean, yeah, but I survived. I mean, it was really a miracle. In fact, God told me afterwards, because that I'd been such a good person my whole life, that God spared me. But
Yeah, that's your story. You're sticking to it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
But that.
Thank you.
Kind of got
Bye,
off.
everyone.
Bye,
Good
everyone.
week.
Have a good week, Natalie. Glad you joined us. I look
Oh,
forward
thank you
to
so
seeing
much.
you again tomorrow, next week. Take care,
I
everyone.
hope so.
Glad you're better.
everybody.
Glad you're better.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good.
Thank you.
See you Friday.
Be
Bye-bye.
well.